All right, we're going to continue on. We're going to go back again and take a closer look at osseous tissues and their composition. And we'll see the differences as well in a little bit more detail between compact bone and your spongy bone. All right, first of all, if you're looking at the microscopic anatomy of bone, we've already mentioned the names of these cells, and we'll talk a little bit more about their function here. Bone does have cells in it. The different types include osteogenic cells. Genic reminds you of genesis, like the beginning. These are stem cells. And so when they're osteogenic cells, they have not taken on any special function. So they live in the periosteum and the endosteum. And as needed, on an as needed basis, these cells will convert, they'll change and become osteoblasts. So they begin to take on a more specialized function. Your osteoblasts are the cells that actually deposit that hard bony matrix, the osseous tissue matrix. So they are your bone forming, your bone synthesizing cells. And what you're going to see is, all right, so if you got an osteoblast, we'll say it kind of looks like that. And once it surrounds itself with bony matrix, kind of traps itself in there. And it exists inside a little chamber, which is also called a lacuna, just like it is in cartilage. I just like that name, lacuna. And a little fluid-filled compartment where those cells are located. And once they do that, once they've surrounded themselves with hard bony tissue, they become what are called osteocytes. So those are your mature bone cells. So their job at that point is still to maintain that bony matrix that's surrounding them, but they're not quite as active anymore as the osteoblasts were. So these three cells are all related to each other. Your osteogenic cells become osteoblasts. Osteoblasts mature into osteocytes. This term blast, that suffix that you see there on the end of the word, often refers to some cell type that's very active and it hasn't not quite fully matured yet. It hasn't taken on its fully mature specialized function. Site usually refers to, when you see that suffix, that's a fully specialized cell type. It has a very set number of jobs that it's supposed to do in the body. So those three are all related to each other. And then you have this fourth type of cell in the bone that are called the osteoclasts. They're not part of this lineage that we were just describing. So they don't descend from the osteogenic cells. And they're very different. They're very large cells. And you see pictures of them. If any of you guys are my age, maybe a little older, a little younger, you certainly remember the game Pac-Man, and osteoclasts kind of look like Pac-Man cells, and their job is to break down the osseous tissue matrix. That's also called bone resorption, is a term we will see a lot during this unit. Winds up being very important for calcium homeostasis. Alright, so here are some pictures of these cells from your textbook. So again, the osteogenic cell you see there on the left, yeah, you can see that's its shape. That is a type of stem cell. It has not specialized yet. Then you got your osteoblast over here. You can see they take on more of a square shape. Metabolically active, synthesize the osseous tissue matrix, important for bone growth. Then those will mature into these osteocytes, and look how spidery they look. They have these long appendages that stick out from the surface. That winds up being important for their survival, as we'll see shortly. So those three cell types are related to each other, and you can see as they change, they dramatically change their shapes. And then here are the osteoclasts, which are big cells. They're way larger than the osteocytes. And see how they kind of look like Pac-Man? They've got this jagged edge over here, and these do kind of function like teeth because these cells secrete acids and digestive enzymes out here that wind up helping to break down the bony matrix when you need to harvest calcium from your own bones to help maintain the calcium levels in your body fluids. So these are kind of bizarre looking cells, and you may notice here on the diagram this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nuclei. So they're nucleated type cells, which actually form from the merger of several cells into one big gigantic one. So they're kind of interesting, different types of cells. All right, let's talk about the anatomy of compact bone. Your compact bone is sometimes referred to as a haversion, or it has a haversion system, or an osteon. An osteon, that's usually the term I use. That's the structural unit of compact bone, and it's more or less shaped like a cylinder, like this, that has a series of rings, almost like a tree trunk, with a big canal right down the center and opening, as we'll see shortly. So those rings that make up an osteon are called lamellae, or lamella would be the singular form of that. And filled with that hard bony matrix. And then in the center, running right down the center here, so it'll be running right down the middle, you have a central canal, or a haversion canal, which has blood vessels and nerves in it. So that's going to wind up bringing the blood supply to this osteon, or this little structural unit here of the compact bone. Alright, so this is a nice picture from your textbook, which is showing one of these osteons. And so sometimes when you see pictures or models of osteons, like if you were in our laboratory here at Calhoun and you were looking at, we have an osteon model in the lab, and it kind of looks like this. And you might think an osteon is more or less shaped kind of like a tuna fish can, and not really. They're actually long cylinders, and they consist of these rings of osseous tissue. Those are called lamellae. And then in the center you have this central canal, and you've got blood vessels and nerves passing through there, so that provides the blood supply. And they're kind of drawing this like a series of telescoping rings. I mean, in reality, they're all squished together, and you just have several rings moving outward away from that central canal where the blood vessels and the nerves are located. Another nice thing they're showing you here on this diagram that's really nice about compact bone is the matrix. The matrix, of course, has minerals in it, like calcium, and there's sodium in there as well, and other things that give it that hard consistency. But there are also a lot of collagen fibers in the osseous tissue matrix, just like you have in other connective tissues of the body. And what does collagen do for you? Helps resist pulling, provides tensile strength. And notice that the collagen fibers in here in these lamellae, or these rings, are arranged in opposite orientations, or perpendicular to each other as you move out from one ring to the next. And that's good, because if your long bones get subjected to twisting forces like that, which can happen pretty frequently, having those collagen fibers running in those different directions helps resist breakage. So the collagen in your bone, actually, that's one of its, you might think it would be the hard minerally matrix in there that helps prevent it from being broken, and it does, but the collagen fibers play an extremely important role as well. They're also important for other types of forces that might be applied to bones. So your bones, helping to prevent breakage of your bones if they get bent, like if you take a blow from the side like that, and the bone is bowing like this over here on this side, having that collagen in there helps prevent breakage of the bone due to that tensile strength. Alright, so this is another nice picture from your textbook, which is giving us another view of compact bone. So right here is an osteon that's being pulled out so that you can see it. And so this is a long bone, and you can see, like we've talked about before, in the center of the long bone over in here, this is where you'd have your medullary cavity, and then you do have a little thin layer of spongy bone located there near the medullary cavity. And then outward from there, as you move out towards the edges of the long bone, that's where you're going to have all this compact bone in there, and much of it consists of these osteons, these three-dimensional cylinders that run up and down the length of the bone, and they're all tightly compacted together to give you this structure that we have in the compact bone. Now, it's not entirely arranged in these telescoping cylinders like you see there. At the very edges, you just have big rings of compact bone that extend all the way to the periosteum, the covering on the outside. And those are called circumferential lamellae that go all the way around the outer surface of the bone. Like circumference, circumferential refers to circumference around the outside of a circle. Okay, let me erase that. Now, let me point out here, they are showing you a little chunk from an osteon in a little bit more detail there. And let me move on to the next slide, because we've got a much nicer blow up of that little chunk of an osteon to show you what's going on in the inside. So here you've got your central canal. This is an osteon. Oops. Come on, pen. Hang on. This is an osteon chunk. Oops. My iPad is not behaving today. Okay, and then you've got, here's your central canal here in the center, which you're seeing only a third of it or so there. So you have an artery and a vein. That's the blood supply for the osteon. You got a nerve running through there. You need a nerve supply to your bones as well. All right, and then you've got these rings. So there's a lamella there, there's a lamella there, lamella, kind of like the rings of a tree trunk. And then the cells in here, these are your osteocytes, those kind of spidery looking cells. Right there, there's an osteocyte, there's one over here. And then in this lamella, osteocyte, osteocyte here in the inner ring, osteocyte as well. All right, and a couple of other things I want to point out to you. So as I mentioned earlier, the osteocytes exist in a lacuna. They've got a little fluid-filled chamber so that they stay surrounded by extracellular interstitial fluids. None of your cells can't survive sitting in a dry extracellular matrix like you have in bone. And living bone is not truly dry. It's not dry like what you would see on dead bones in the laboratory, but it still does not have a moist enough consistency for your cells to just be sitting in that. And then if you notice here, this term canaliculus, that's kind of a fun term to say. Try to say that really fast, about 10 times. Plural of that would be canaliculi. And those are little tiny tunnels through which these spidery appendages on your osteocytes pass. Those are called canaliculi. And the reason you have those is that these osteocytes in these lamellae, they reach out and they contact other osteocytes. So in each ring. So the cells in your first ring here are reaching out and contacting the cells in the second ring, and those cells are reaching out and contacting the cells in the third ring. And so why is that important? That's important because these cells here in the first lamella, they have access to a good blood supply. So oxygen gas, nutrients coming out of the artery there are able to diffuse to the cells in the first ring. The cells over here, let's say in the outer rings, they're not very close to the artery there. So they don't have good access to oxygen and nutrients. However, since these osteocytes are all reaching out and contacting each other through those canaliculi, the cells in the first ring are able to pass nutrients and oxygen to the cells in the second ring, and those cells can pass oxygen and nutrients to the cells in the third ring, and so forth and so on. So that's kind of cool. And then also in reverse, the veins of the body take away carbon dioxide and other wastes, so the cells out here can transfer their wastes to the cells in that ring, which can transfer waste to the cells in that ring, and then those will wind up diffusing into the vein that you see there to carry those types of things away from our little osteon. So that's kind of neat. All those cells are networked together like that within the osteon. All right, so you have that central canal that exists, or those central canals that exist within the osteons. There are other canals within compact bone called perforating or Volkmann's canals, and so if the central canals are running like this, the perforating canals run at right angles. So, you know, if you've got arteries that are coming in from the surface, from the periosteum, like this, from either edge of the bone, and then they can make these little right angles and turns into the central canal. So that's just some of the, you know, those are like streets running perpendicular to each other to bring that blood supply into the bone, and also the nerves as well. And then we've talked about the lacunae and the canaliculi. So we'll move on from there. How about your spongy bone? Spongy bone's different, so it doesn't have the ring-shaped organization like we just saw. But you still do actually have multiple layers of cells within spongy bone as well. So the subunit again of spongy bone, those subunits are called trabeculae. That's a plural form of the word with the E on the end there. Spongy bone winds up being built and arranging along lines of stress. And so what that means is that they get synthesized, they get produced based on the stresses that are applied to your bones, and that way you have the most support and framework where you need it. You know, why do we have this spongy bone structure? Now imagine if throughout your entire skeletal system all you had was compact bone. You know, how would that impact the weight of your body? It would make you much, much heavier. So instead, a lot of our bone consists of this spongy framework with these trabeculae, and that helps lighten the bones. And also the trabecular structure, where you have kind of these X-shaped trabeculae within the spongy bone, those kind of function like railroad trusses. You know, if you've seen a railroad bridge before, you got a little train going across the railroad bridge. You know, a railroad bridge is not a solid sheet of concrete or wood or whatever. You have crisscrossing trusses on the bridge, and that crisscrossing of those pieces of wood or whatever, metal, whatever it is, help distribute the weight of the train that's passing over the bridge. So the weight gets distributed this way, weight gets distributed this way, and that way, and that way, and that way, and the overall effect is it gives you just as much support, or close to as much support, as if you had a solid substance there on underneath the train. Same deal for your spongy bone. The arrangement is such that it's able to distribute forces, weight, that's passing down along these trabeculae in kind of a back and forth motion, and it's able to achieve almost as much support and weight bearing as solid bone would be able to do. Not quite, but close. And if you blow up, let me erase this, like they're showing you here on the diagram, if you looked inside a trabecula, that's the singular form of trabeculae, so you chopped one of those open and looked at it in cross section, like they're showing you here. You do have osteoblasts around the edges, and you do have a few rings or lamellae, and you do have osteocytes inside there, kind of like you do in compact bone. But these are much, 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 much smaller structures compared to the osteons that you have in your compact bone. And this is going to be covered with an endosteum. Erase all that. You've got an endosteum, connective tissue covering, a little thin sheet of connective tissue around the trabecula there, and that's going to have blood vessels passing through it that supply the nutrients to the trabecula, where you have those cells scattered around in there that are Metabolically active, the osteocytes in there, those are the cells that produce that hard bony matrix that you have there in the trabecula. Alright, so that concludes this particular video lecture. The next one we'll have a fairly short little lecture where we're going to talk more about, so we keep talking about this hard bony matrix, what's actually in there, what is that made of. That will be a short little lecture that we'll have for the fifth one before we move on to the next topic.